So this presentation is actually an evolution of a presentation over time, and I will continue to iterate on it, and eventually it will manifest itself in many blog posts and potentially a digital book. I call it the EdTech Startup Handbook. It's more or less notes that we have as education entrepreneurs related to Learn Capital, and notes that we have as early stage investors into the education startup ecosystem. Please be in touch with me about it. Ask me questions. Ask me tough questions. Ask me to explain myself better. Ask me to give you more context or background or information. Because this is, again, it's an iterative process between us at Learn Capital and the companies that we connect with and that seek our insights and would benefit from kind of the collective wisdom of all of the education initiatives and entrepreneurial activity around the world. A little bit on Learn Capital, just so you know who you're hearing from. So Learn Capital is likely the most active investor into education technology anywhere in the world. Over the past 5 years, we've invested in nearly 50 education technology startups. So that's at a pace of about 10 a year. And we have invested in essentially every age and demographic, every product type, every media type, every device, leading with any device, and any type of education or learning service, either directly to consumer or to schools or institutions or corporations. And so we like to think that we have a broad view of the space, and we like to think that we have a global approach to the space. A little bit more on me. My name is Michael Staten. I come to venture capital not as a financier or a venture capitalist at heart. I really started as an educator and consider myself an educator. I was just very frustrated at the lack of technology supporting me as a teacher, my students as learners, and started teaching myself to code. Eventually, I founded a company and took that through several rounds of investment and growth. Then worked as a venture partner for New Schools Venture Fund, which is kind of the most prolific K-12 school support technology investor. Then went on to be kind of a co-conspirator, not really a co-founder, but a conspirator with Dev Bootcamp and Uncollege, and now I'm a partner at Learn Capital, where I've led investments into, at this point, about 8 companies over the past 2 years, and look forward to continuing to support many other companies by either investing in them or advising them and helping them with strategy and accessing, important parts of the ecosystem. And I look forward to trying to help you guys in the same way. Because you all are entrepreneurial teams and we're here to talk about the startup process, it might be welcome to actually define what a startup is. I really appreciate Dave McClure, the founder of 500 Startups, take on this, which is that a startup who's marching into unknown unknowns is really just confused about at least one of 3 things: what their product is, who their customer is, or how they make money. And if the organization is actually certain about what all 3 of those things are, it's kind of no longer a startup. And thus, because these 3 things are either confusing or unknown, the startup is actually in a mode where it's constantly learning, and the unit of progress is actually validated learning. In terms of what we look for at Learn Capital, we look for 5 kind of major areas of attributes of the teams and the companies that come to us. So the first is market attractors. This is the most important to us because we are in venture capital. We're really looking for large and growing markets, particularly fast-growing markets and ones with properties where there's very little market friction and there's the ability to rapidly scale. We also look for team dynamics, so we look for whole teams, which I'll discuss in a second, and we look for teams that have a strong bond, have a great origin story, and work well together. We also look for quantified validation and traction, which I'll get into later as I talk about moving from kind of anecdotal to quantified. And then we look at for product velocity and maturity. By velocity, I mean iteration speed, the speed at which a company can change the product to meet anticipated market needs. And then the last is company culture. A lot of really, really strong and high-performing teams actually kind of, not all of them end up creating a high-performing company. And there's something that shifts between 5 and 15 people where the existing high-performing team needs to actually externalize the way they do things and their philosophy and their energy and create a high-performing company culture. And so as a company scales, we look for attributes. The team is really the most important thing to evaluate. And so we look for what we call whole teams. And so these are teams that, with the number of people they have in their founding team that are incentivized primarily by equity, they have all of the skill sets necessary to build the team and to execute against the market opportunity. So in particular, issues around product design, engineering, marketing, and sales, the attributes of the founding team are extremely important. The reason I have this kind of table or matrix here that goes from 10x to missing is that it's important to see at least one or two places where there's 10x performance. And 10x is kind of Silicon Valley code word for great team members that are way more productive than even good team members. And so there's a lot of evidence that shows that the most high-performing team members often outperform even good team members, not by a little, but by a lot. And so we look for a whole team where all skill sets are present, and then we also look for 10x performers amongst the team. There are really 4 early stage milestones investors are hoping that you have achieved before they invest in you. And they look for evidence that these various areas of what you might call fit have occurred already. So the first is that there's a very strong founder market fit. So there's a story, a biography, an experience set that demonstrates that this team is in the right market and that this market's going to receive this team or this founder very, very well. So we look for entrepreneurs that are building kind of their life's great work, and if we told them that they shouldn't do this, they'd probably do it anyway. Or if they weren't going to get paid for it, they would do it anyway. The second is a market vision fit. So there's been a process of market development and customer validation, customer development, all of that, where they can verify that this vision is very attractive to the market. The third is a product vision fit process where they've iterated and prototyped and simplified their product or services offering to the point where they know that their product actually matches their vision, and it's not overscoped, it's not underscoped, it's not adjacent, it's actually the exact right product to achieve the overall vision. And then the last is product market fit, which is a widely discussed term, which means that the market demand is really unlocked and is starting to come to the company rather than the company having to go out to the market. So the best evidence of product market fit is a high net promoter score, lots of word of mouth marketing, and in general, anytime earned media discusses it, you get an influx of customers. So these early stage milestones, generally investors are wanting you to have accomplished before you receive investment, not before you necessarily meet with an investor, but before you receive an investment. And most investors these days are trying to invest after product market fit. So the next kind of segment of advice related to product market fit is that you really want to create a vision and define a product that finds what strategists call a blue ocean. There's actually a book, it's called Blue Ocean Strategy. It was written by Boston Consulting Group, or some of the partners and founders of Boston Consulting Group. And one of the activities that we're going to do today is actually to do a strategy canvas, which is the kind of tangible activity that they teach you how to do in this book, Blue Ocean Strategy. What they mean by blue ocean versus red ocean is an analogy to kind of sharks. Basically, in a crowded market or in a crowded section of the ocean, you have a lot of predator-prey relationships already. And if there's blood in the water, aka money being made, is the analogy, then sharks immediately come and swarm the area. And it's not a good place, safe place to be. It's a dangerous place to be. And so if you're trying to fish or identify market opportunities, you don't necessarily want to play in a red ocean. You want to define your market opportunity so that there are no other competitors. You want to set a direction for your team and your strategy where fighting with existing competition isn't your challenge. It's really how quickly can you sail in your own direction. So that's the find a blue ocean. And the art of that is really to position away from your competitors and to create a category in which you are the natural leader. It's worth taking a deeper dive on the word positioning. Positioning is extremely important, especially as you're talking to investors, because investors or grant makers, their job is to look at everything. And so often, whereas potentially you've only talked to one or two organizations or can only identify two or three organizations that might be competitors or might be similar, often investors have seen 3 or 4 times the number of companies that claim to do what you are trying to do. Often the best ideas are not original. They're actually just kind of in the air, and many types of people are trying to execute against that idea at the same time. So the key here in positioning is to differentiate several times over. So you need to be able to differentiate your value proposition in the mind of the customer, your target and beachhead markets. And what I mean by that is a beachhead market is the place where you start. It's the most approachable market that you can grab first. So of different customer segments, which are your target and which are your beachhead markets? And then there's your path to market, which is the way you believe you'll be getting distribution and sales. And you often want to differentiate that as well because sales channels or distribution channels get crowded quickly. After you've been able to effectively position yourself and differentiate, go back and look at the definition of who you are, where you stand in the market, and your overall product offering. Being very narrow and focused and simplifying your value propositions should also have an effect on your overall product definition. It should have an effect on the ability to define your beachhead. And again, your beachhead is your target market that you're starting with as you grow. It should also help you define your key performance indicators and your growth assumptions. At Learn Capital, we hear a lot of strategies in the education space that use the word and, meaning that the way that they differentiate is they're going to do two separate things at the same time, or they're going to add to value propositions or functionality of kind of existing solutions. And that rarely pans out for startups. It can pan out for incumbent companies, but it rarely pans out for startups because there's something called complexity cost. And so everything that you attempt to do becomes more difficult and more challenging and more effortful to maintain, the more complex it is. And this is exponential rather than linear. So if it's twice as complex, it's not twice as costly, it's actually 4 times as costly. So there's an exponential relationship with the complexity. And very small teams of people just have a significant challenge in upkeeping a complex product, a complex code base, a complex customer set. And so staying simple and refusing to use the word "and" as you define your product and focus who you are is extremely important. So the tool that the Boston Consulting Group recommends to help find a blue ocean is called the strategy canvas. And a strategy canvas uses the x-axis to list value propositions or attributes, or what you might call vectors of competition. And the y-axis is strong at the top and weak at the bottom. And you go through those value propositions in a way where you're showing where you're strong and purposefully not competing. And you're showing where your competitors are weak and where they are strong. And if you do it correctly, you should dominate one side of the strategy canvas, and your competitors should dominate another side of the strategy canvas. And what this forces you to do is to decide who you are and how you want to compete. And you can't compete on everything, so you have to purposefully choose things you want to be weak on. This is the role of the strategy canvas. In order to make this session interactive, I think you're going to either iterate on a strategy canvas you've already done, or you're going to do a strategy canvas kind of right now while we're together. There's an example strategy canvas here on this slide with General Assembly. It shows General Assembly competing with MBA programs. That's their primary competition that they're differentiating against. It also shows online courses provided by Udemy, which is another one of our portfolio companies. But as you can see, MBA programs dominate one side, and General Assembly dominates another side. So I'd like you to do that in your own market. Another exercise that's important to do early in the company lifecycle or the project lifecycle is a persona map. And what you need to do here is to be able to list all of the types of people, either their titles or their character attributes. It often helps if you name them, like a fake name like Susan, and list them all, list out their attributes, and then prioritize them by your target market or the target persona for your marketing messages or for your product usage, and then in concentric circles on the way out, prioritize kind of who it's not for or who it's much less for. And if you do this correctly, you should have a full understanding of each constituent or stakeholder in the decision making around adopting your technology, product, or service. And you should also be able to kind of force rank them or force prioritize them on the way out from that target concentric circle. Having that present, having that on the wall for your team so that they can make sure that they're weighing trade-offs effectively, that they're prioritizing decisions effectively, it can be very important and very unifying for early stage teams. So I'd like it if you'd actually take this exercise seriously and fill out this persona map. If I had to define what Learn Capital looks for in one statement, it would be the statement, indisputable traction towards a compelling vision in pursuit of a large market opportunity. I've chosen those words very carefully. Indisputable traction means that you have quantitative proof beyond a reasonable doubt that you are getting traction and growing rapidly into this market opportunity. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about moving from anecdotal to quantified validation and traction. Compelling vision is also a carefully chosen word. Visions are pretty easy to come by. Even compelling visions are relatively easy to come by. But the vision needs to have a certain amount of magnetism and a certain amount of inevitability around it. And then a large market opportunity is extremely important when dealing with venture investors. The economics and incentives around venture capital dictate that any one investment needs to potentially return the fund. So if we have a $100 million fund, you would need to be able to exit the company for $100 million or above. And so what that means is that we can't be investing in large markets. So you need to map what you're doing now to a credibly large market opportunity and actually have a compelling vision that is credible, that gets you from the place you are now to executing into that large market opportunity. It's also worth discussing the kind of two things that every venture investor looks for, which is either or both of finding either a money printer or a situation where you can't keep up with demand. Often these are not found in the same company. Sometimes they are, though. So in education in particular, easy revenue models, easy ways to monetize your product are somewhat scarce. So in terms of finding a money printer, what I mean is that there's a straightforward revenue model that is what we call unit economic positive, meaning you make more money on it than you spend. And you can just kind of keep on investing in that and it'll keep on returning capital. So the easy ones in education have been textbook rentals and student financial instruments, but there are some others as well. Anyway, it's important to try to go after either one of those two situations, if not both. Something that we look for in startups we call scaling discipline, and this is essentially the ability to manage runway. What I mean by runway is the amount of time you have left before you die because you run out of cash, which is a scary but straightforward way to put it. If you're spending $30,000 a month, but you're making $20,000 a month, your burn is $10,000 a month. If you have $100,000 in the bank, you have 10 months of runway. It generally takes about 6 months to raise money, if it's even possible. And so we recommend that startups start raising money at least 9 months ahead of when they plan to run out of cash. That being said, the fundraising environment has changed dramatically in the past 4 to 5 years because more companies are being seed funded while the same amount of companies are being funded at the Series A and Series B level. So what that means is that there's more early stage companies that are getting started that don't find subsequent funding. And that means that you should probably plan for a reality where you can never raise money at all. Anyway, what you need to do with your runway is make sure that you're going to achieve financeable milestones. So if you have 10 months left, you need to understand what are the kind of business metrics or what are the kind of fundamental changes and dynamics that you need to unlock in order to get investors interested in your project. So what you should probably do is actually just listen to investors talk or listen to donors talk, and they'll lay out the couple things they would need to see in order to be interested. If you pattern match that across a couple of donors, funders, or investors, you should be able to distill it down to 2 or 3 milestones that you need to hit before you come close to running out of cash. So one of the best things you could do as a early stage team is to move from anecdotal validation to quantified validation. And what I mean by that is that every team comes to us and says, oh, I've talked to customers and they love it. Or we have users and they love it. And that just doesn't really clarify anything because everyone says that. So what you need to do is move from hearing great feedback and getting kind of anecdotal love to quantifying that feedback and making like numerical love or quantified love, to talking about demand anecdotally and talking about numbers in the market kind of from top down, and really looking at your revenue potential by having funnel metrics and pipeline value and doing a bottom-up kind of revenue analysis based on market capture. Another thing you can do is take product success and take basically like anecdotal engagement or vanity metrics around engagement and actually have very defined and measured key performance indicators of how your product is being used and whether or not loyalty and engagement and retention is increasing rather than decreasing. But the exercise here is simply to move from hearing that you're doing a good job to really fully understanding what that means and setting about to define how you can do a better job. Another random piece of advice we have to tell people a lot is to just simply stop and reflect on what you've been learning, slow down, be more thoughtful and analytical on your approach. So many entrepreneurs are in such a hurry to try to win customers or raise funding that they don't realize how much of the reality they're missing and how much wisdom they have yet to ingest. And probably the most productive thing they could do is to slow down and not try to execute so fast and just simply learn as much as possible, beef up their skills, listen more, read some of the major works around innovation and startups and things like that. So if I have any random advice, it's slow down and learn and reflect and analyze and actually get better and more wise at what you're doing. This concludes my remarks for the EdTech Startup Handbook. I should be available for questions right now over Skype, and hopefully we can engage as a class. If not, please write down your questions and send them to me either through Twitter or over email, michael@learncapital.com. And hopefully we can schedule a time where I can have a one-on-one with you this week. All right. Thanks so much, and have a great conference. Enjoy all of the opportunities and relationships that you're able to create in that unique environment of WISE.